6, 1991, suspected serial killer Charles Ng was finally returned to California. The Calaveras County District Attorney charged Ng with 12 counts of murder. Detective Sergeant Randy Grasmuck transported Ng daily from the California Department of Corrections to the Calaveras County Courthouse.
We had high security. We had our SWAT team up on the roof for a while. We had heard that somebody wanted to kill Charles Ng. So let's face it, the last thing we wanted to do as Calaveras County Sheriff's Department was lose Charles Ng.
Calaveras County was not prepared to handle a prisoner like Charles Ng. Their courthouse wasn't secure enough to hold a maximum security prisoner. The county had to build a special cage to house Ng during his legal proceedings. From the moment Ng arrived in the county, he was intent on wreaking havoc and creating delay. He began by trying to fire his legal team and complaining about his treatment. He filed motions for better food and a shorter commute from the prison. He demanded to have his cage dismantled. Although each motion was frivolous, it sapped the resources of the Calaveras County District Attorney's Office.
Well, I think I was very naive when I took the case. I didn't realize how truly huge this case was. We're very small. We have 5 attorneys, including myself. There's the assistant district attorney, and then I have 3 deputy district attorneys. We have 2 investigators, and we have 3 support staff, and that's it in our criminal division. It's like a very small law firm.
The prosecution battled Charles Ng for a full year before his preliminary hearing even started.
Your Honor, at this point in time, we would like to present photos, affidavits, and videotapes into evidence against the defendant.
The purpose of this proceeding was simply to determine whether the prosecution had sufficient evidence to try Ng for the 12 murders.
Moving forward to trial.
Although the burden of proof is not as strict as that of an actual trial, the prosecution had little direct evidence linking Ng to the murders. Lacking eyewitnesses, fingerprints, and blood evidence, the prosecution would have to present its case mostly on circumstantial evidence. Their strongest evidence was the videotape found at the cabin entitled M Ladies. The preliminary hearing was the first time the tape was played for the public. On the tape, Lake and Ng were seen torturing 2 women, one of whom was Brenda O'Connor. Inspector Erdelatz explains the impact of the videotaped evidence.
Brenda O'Connor is a woman who lived on the adjacent property with her boyfriend and his friend and their little baby. And you see her on film, she's handcuffed and she's begging Leonard Lake and Charles Ng for her baby back. She wants her baby back and she's crying. Of course, they killed this little baby, and it's such a sad thing to see her asking for this little baby back.
The tapes were incriminating, but with so little physical evidence directly linking Ng to the murders, the prosecution would have to rely on the testimony of another criminal.
Hey, LaBerge.
Maurice LaBerge had served time with Ng in Canada. To pass the time, Ng entertained LaBerge with crudely drawn cartoons depicting his crimes and with stories of what had happened at Lake's cabin in California. To gain favor with his parole board, LaBerge turned over the cartoons and told authorities the details of his conversations with Ng. One of the most damning cartoons depicted Ng killing a baby. LaBerge testified at Ng's extradition hearing, detailing everything Ng had confessed during their jail time together. LaBerge's testimony was presented as evidence. On November the 13th, 1992, the court found sufficient grounds to try Charles Ng on 12 counts of murder. The judge set his trial date for January the 12th, 1993.
felt that the case would be tried and over with by 93, but no later than 1994. Well, that didn't happen. What did happen was delay.
Now that Ng knew he would stand trial for his crimes, he began a desperate attempt to delay the proceedings in any way possible.
I'll take that into consideration.
Thank you, Your Honor.
He filed a motion alleging that his court-appointed lawyers were incompetent. He succeeded in firing them, and the court appointed him new counsel. Because pre-trial publicity made it impossible to find an impartial jury in Calaveras County, Ng's new defense team filed a motion to move the trial. A judge granted the motion, moving the trial to Orange County in Southern California. A fully loaded lorry delivered a mountain of case material to Ng's new counsel, the Orange County Public Defender's Office. The material included hundreds of boxes of records documenting 8 years of courtroom hearings, witness testimony, investigative, medical, and police reports, and thousands of evidence photographs. William Kelly, Ng's newly appointed counsel, asked for and received 2.5 years to prepare his client's case. The prosecution made the move from Calaveras County, 650 kilometers south, to Orange County, and prepared for the largest case of their careers. The years of delay worried prosecutor Peter Smith.
As you know, in any case, memories fade, witnesses die, things of that nature. And so when you tack on 6 years to the life of a criminal case, that's a long time to delay a case from going to trial.
Good morning, gentlemen. Have a seat. Good morning.
As the prosecution and defense attorneys finalized their trial preparations, Ng again attempted to delay the process. But Judge John Ryan put a stop to his tactics. The case was finally going to trial. The prosecution team from Calaveras County worked out their strategy with Charlene Hanaka, the Deputy Attorney General for the state of California.
She's a tremendous lawyer and a better person. She was, in essence, the heart and soul for this case and for the prosecution.
As the prosecutors prepared to begin jury selection, the team suffered a serious setback. Maurice LaBerge was killed in a car crash while on parole. He was the only person to whom Ng had confessed his crimes. The prosecution had just lost its key witness. "13 years had passed since investigators began finding bodies at a mountain cabin in Calaveras County, California. Although they eventually linked 25 missing people to Lake's property, they only had enough evidence to charge Charles Ng with 12 counts of murder. Ng had managed to delay his trial for more than a decade, but could delay no longer. The murder trial was finally about to begin. The accused serial killer's fate would now rest with a jury of his peers. Peter Smith's job was to select that jury.
Because the case was going to take so long, we had to time qualify jurors. We had to bring in over 2,000 people from Orange County to ask them basically, can you commit to the time it'll take to try this case?
While counsel was in the midst of qualifying the jurors,
Please restrain yourself.
Ng grew agitated.
Please restrain yourself.
Shouting obscenities, he tried to halt the proceedings. Judge Ryan ordered Ng to wear an electric stun belt for the duration of the trial. The bailiff would trigger the device by remote control if he became disruptive again. Lawyers from the prosecution and the defense took a month to choose a jury of 8 women and 4 men, along with 6 substitutes. To protect their identities, each member of the jury was assigned a number. On Monday, October the 26th, 1998, the trial began. For both the prosecution and the defense, opening statements serve as an outline, telling the jury what they're trying to prove and how they intend to prove it. With the years of waiting over, Charlene Hanaka rose to make the opening statement for the prosecution.
What the evidence in this case is going to show is that this defendant, with Leonard Lake, planned and committed the 12 charged murders in this case. This is a chart which lists the 12 counts. It lists the names of the various victims, and it lists the dates when these murders were alleged to have occurred. The evidence will show that between a time frame from July 1984 until 1985, these 12 victims disappeared from the face of the earth. And this trial will tell you the story of what happened to them. The evidence will show that when investigators conducted their investigation up at that property, they found that the occupant was someone named Leonard Lake. And they found that that property had been used as a killing field and as a mass graveyard. The investigators also found direct evidence connecting this defendant to that property up in Wilseyville. And what was that direct evidence that they found? They found, buried in the ground in a plastic container, a videotape. And on this videotape, there are 4 scenes involving the victim.
She then told the jury about the M Ladies tape found buried near the cabin and how they depicted a partially clad Ing demanding massages from Kathleen Allen and cutting off Brenda O'Connor's clothes.
We're going to play for you 2 segments from that videotape as a means of demonstrating the evidence and in helping you understand.
The videotape was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. It showed the jury exactly who Charles Ing was, a man who not only tortured women, but who recorded his acts on videotape so he could relive them again and again.
The videotape's dramatic. It is the most incriminating piece of evidence I've ever used in a case. It is also the most emotional piece of evidence I've ever used in a case. You can sense the terror and the fear those 2 victims had when they realized the situation they were in.
Because this was the strongest physical evidence linking Ing to the murders, the prosecution planned to use the videotape throughout the trial to prove Charles Ing's guilt. William Kelly, Ing's court-appointed attorney, scarcely mentioned the defendant in much of his opening statement. His strategy was to shift the focus of the accusations from his client, Charles Ing, to the late Leonard Lake.
The defense in this case is really simple. That is, Leonard Lake had a motive for murder. And that motive is grounded in a deep-seated hatred for women, which began in his early childhood and manifested itself throughout his life. Leonard Lake also had a plan for murder. And that plan was something he called the Miranda Project. And he also had an intent to commit murder. And that is reflected in his diary, a journal which he wrote in, and even more strongly in a videotape he made.
Kelly asserted that Lake's plan for murder was outlined in his diary under the heading The Miranda Project. He then read the jury excerpts from Leonard Lake's journal. Kelly suggested that Lake's conspirator was not Ing, but Clarelyn Ballars, Lake's ex-wife. He asserted that she knew about the Miranda Project and even recruited potential victims.
What you're going to learn, folks, is that the prosecution case is based on circumstantial evidence. Nobody's going to walk in here, sit down in that jury box, point a finger at Charles Eng, and say, I saw Charlie Eng murder somebody. It's not going to happen.
With very little physical evidence placing Ing at the murders, Kelly intended to discredit the prosecution's circumstantial case and prove it was Leonard Lake, not Charles Ing, who murdered the 12 victims. He asserted that Ing killed no one. The prosecution called Sergeant Larry Copeland of the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department to the stand.
Can you tell us how long we were with the Calaveras County?
He told the jury about a discovery he made while analyzing the videotapes confiscated from Ing's San Francisco apartment.
And I'd put this tape in and push play, and it started with the credits. So I thought, well, gee whiz, someone didn't rewind this tape. So I pushed rewind, but I didn't push stop first. I just pushed rewind. So it started playing in reverse. And then all of a sudden, right at the end of the tape, it went, whoop.
What Copeland discovered was a still image of two bodies in a wheelbarrow. The image was entered into evidence.
Yes, it is.
The medical examiner was sworn in.
Look at these photos for me.
He was asked to identify two photographs of bodies found at the cabin.
Yes, I believe that's the remains of Scott Stapley.
And this next one?
Those remains are from Lonnie Bond.
He went on to explain the way in which Lonnie Bond and Scott Stapley were bound, gagged, and wrapped in sleeping bags. The sleeping bags matched those on the tape. The medical examiner testified that the bodies on the tape were in full rigor mortis. Rigor mortis occurs shortly after death, when the blood flow is interrupted. It only lasts for a few hours, until the body begins to decay. This directly refuted Ing's statement. In Canada, Ing told Inspector Erdelatz he helped bury Bond and Stapley 24 hours after they were murdered. Whoever had taken the picture had done so immediately after they were killed. The single frame on the videotape found at Ing's apartment linked him to the murder of Lonnie Bond and Scott Stapley. Because so few of the remains found on the property could be identified, the prosecution relied on hundreds of personal effects discovered at Ing's apartment and the cabin to link him to the victims. These items were photographed and entered as evidence. The district attorney's lead investigator, Mitch Herdlicker, was in charge of witnesses' testimony for the prosecution.
Yeah.
Well, we had over 200 pieces of evidence that we used in the guilt phase of the trial, and we had about 75 witnesses that we had to bring in from various parts of the country as well as Canada to prove that those items belonged to the people who had gone missing and the victims in our case.
The prosecution then attempted to establish a link between Kathleen Allen and Charles Ing. Kathleen Allen was one of the women on the M Ladies tape who was tortured by Lake and Ing. Although her body was never found, several of her personal effects were unearthed near the cabin. The prosecution asked her sister to identify a heart-shaped pendant.
Ms. Allen, I know this may be very difficult for you, but I want you to look very closely at this necklace and tell me if you recognize it.
It's a necklace Kathy used to wear all the time.
Thank you. Your Honor, we'd like the record to show that the witness identified the necklace as belonging to the victim, Kathy Allen. And at this time, the people would like to move that we place this in evidence.
The prosecution then began to construct the timeline of Kathleen Allen's disappearance to explain how she got to the cabin.
On April 14th, 1985...
Her former supervisor discussed an odd telephone conversation she had while at work.
Yes, sir, I did. And can you tell us about that conversation?
Yes. She said she got a call, and she said she wanted to join her boyfriend because he got a gunshot wound.
Kathleen Allen worked at a shop in California. Her boyfriend, Mike Carroll, had met Charles Ng while serving time in Leavenworth Federal Prison. Mike called Kathleen to say he was in Lake Tahoe and had been shot. He was sending a friend to pick her up and bring her to him. Kathleen told her supervisor what Mike had said and asked for some time off.
And what happened after that?
A man came by to pick her up.
In a what?
In a brown or bronze Honda, I think.
Did you have an opportunity to see the driver?
A little, yes.
Can you tell us what he looked like?
He was in his 40s, bald, dark hair, and he had a beard. That's all I remember.
The prosecution then showed the jury Kathleen Allen's videotaped ordeal. John Crawford investigated her disappearance.
The videotape picks up from there and shows that Kathy is brought into the residence, into the living room of the residence in Wilseyville. She is handcuffed and she is seated in a chair. Kathy was told, if you don't agree with us right now, we're going to take you into the bedroom, tie you to the bed, rape you, take you outside, and put a bullet in your head, and bury you in the same place we buried Mike, who was her boyfriend, Mike Carroll.
Did you ever hear from her again?
Kathleen was never seen or heard from again.
I got a typed letter.
He received a letter which said that she had a job in Lake Tahoe and didn't intend to return. The letter was dated May the 6th. 3 weeks after she left the shop. Many of the victims' co-workers, families, and friends received typewritten letters from the victims to explain their absence. Comparison of the letters showed they all originated from the same typewriter. An Olympia typewriter found in the cabin was analyzed by forensic document examiners. They concluded that it was the one on which the letters were written. The prosecution entered the typewriter into evidence. During the most expensive murder trial in Californian history, the prosecution tried to prove that Charles Ng was responsible for the abduction and murder of the Dubbs family. They called Karen Tuck, who was asked to testify about the last time she spoke with her friend, Deborah Dubbs, on the telephone.
Well, Deb was expecting someone to come over to talk to Harvey or see his video equipment. And then the doorbell rang, or someone knocked, and we terminated the conversation.
So someone came to her door while you were in the phone conversation with her?
Right.
Harvey Dubbs, a part-time wedding photographer, had placed an ad in a newspaper offering to rent out his video equipment.
We've got a heavy-duty coax cable, too.
Karen Tuck told the court she tried to call Deborah Dubbs the next day, but no one answered the phone. The Dubbs family disappeared on July the 25th, 1984. Their bodies were never found.
Well, Deb was expecting someone to come over and talk with
Karen
Harvey.
Tuck was the last person to speak with Deborah Dubbs on the day she and her family were abducted from their San Francisco home. Detective Irene Brunn found an inventory of Harvey Dubbs' equipment at his home.
Harvey was meticulous in keeping records and photographs, and he kept the original receipts from when he purchased them. He had serial numbers, brand names for everything that he had.
Harvey Dubb's detailed records enabled investigators to trace his equipment to Leonard Lake's cabin. But some video equipment was also found in Charles Ng's apartment. One of these pieces matched Harvey Dubb's inventory. The prosecution entered the video equipment into evidence. Since the Dubbs' bodies were never found, the prosecution's strategy was to use overwhelming circumstantial evidence to tie Ng to the missing family.
The case is like a puzzle. You have to start putting the pieces together so that the jury can get a clear understanding of what took place. And to prove a case, you have to fit enough pieces of the puzzle together so that a jury believes beyond a reasonable doubt that a particular defendant murdered or committed a crime.
And focused our attention on this bunker.
Sergeant Larry Copeland was called back to the stand.
When we first came on to the scene,
He testified about the 7 burn sites they'd found. He also described the hundreds of bone fragments, many of which had been crushed, burned, and scattered around the property. Judging from the size and number of burn sites, investigators suspected Lake and Ng had used fire to dispose of the bodies of many of their victims. The condition of the remains would make it impossible to identify all the victims.
Wilseyville property?
No one had any witnesses to any of these crimes. The prosecution's next move was to put Ng's confessor on the stand. During his Canadian prison term, Ng told Maurice LaBerge he helped Lake abduct victims and burn their bodies.
Here's your book.
LaBerge was the prosecution's key witness. His account and the drawings Ng gave him would cement their case. But his death before the trial began was potentially disastrous. At the extradition hearing in Canada, LaBerge testified about everything Ng had told him. In a calculated move, the prosecution tried to get the written transcripts of LaBerge's Canadian testimony read into the record.
If you rule it admissible, then it'll be taken up on cross.
Despite the defense's strong objections, the judge ruled to admit the transcript. Sergeant Raymond Munro of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police took the stand and read LaBerge's prior testimony. In the transcript, LaBerge described how Ng gave him the grotesque cartoons and spoke of the crimes he committed, including the videotaped sessions with Kathleen Allen and Brenda O'Connor.
He told me that the videotape shows a female complaining that it's too warm, and he had a butterfly knife, he called it. He flicked it open and cut her clothes off.
Thank you.
Maurice LaBerge was a career criminal who served repeated terms for robbery and sexual assault. During the cross-examination, Kelly attacked LaBerge's credibility.
Isn't it true that Maurice LaBerge had an extensive criminal history?
Objection, Your Honor. We've already established that.
Overruled.
Thank you. Sir, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And isn't it also true that as part of an agreement with the Canadian government to enter the witness protection program that Maurice LaBerge received $36,000?
I believe that was the deal that we struck with him, yes.
Kelly implied that LaBerge's testimony had been bought.
Convictions for sexual assault and robbery?
Yes, it is.
And do you recall offhand what, if any, contents were retrieved from the automobile at the site of the accident?
There was $20,000 in cash found in the vehicle.
$20,000 in cash?
Kelly's cross-examination had been successful in insinuating that LaBerge would say anything for money.
You're a career police officer, isn't it?
Although the prosecution's key witness had taken the stand by proxy, they now feared the defense attack had destroyed his credibility.
Isn't it true?
Sergeant Munro was one of the prosecution's last witnesses. After presenting their case for 12 days, the prosecution rested. On November the 17th, 1988, William Kelly began presenting Ng's defense to the jury. He had a relatively simple strategy to prove that Leonard Lake was the real killer and Ng was just a bystander. First, Kelly called a series of women to the stand.
Identify yourself to the jury, please.
Each testified as to their bizarre sexual encounters with Leonard Lake. The women spoke of his interest in bondage and taking lurid photographs. One woman had a year-long relationship with Lake and posed for dozens of photos. She explained she left him because of his frightening fantasies involving sex and death.
So that would have been 15 years ago?
Another woman testified that Lake had threatened to rape her and that he believed in human sacrifice. The testimony painted Lake as the monster and established that none of the witnesses had even met Charles Ng.
Thank you.
Another witness testified that he'd seen Lake verbally abuse Ng, helping the defense establish that Ng was subservient to Lake. By calling witnesses who'd often seen Balazs with Lake at the cabin, the defense attempted to show that Balazs herself was an accomplice to Lake. Kelly also used this testimony to demonstrate that Ng spent little time at Leonard Lake's cabin. The defense's strongest proof that Lake planned to kidnap, torture, and murder his victims was his journal. It was here that Lake outlined the so-called Miranda Project. While the jury was out, Kelly moved to enter an edited version of the journal into evidence. Because the edited version eliminated references to Charles Ng, the judge resisted.
I believe the court should eliminate misleading evidence. And this edited diary could do just that, if it is intended to show that Leonard Lake killed all 12 victims without the help of Charles Ng. I believe the diary needs to be excluded. Most of it is just pure junk.
But the diary shows that Lake was thinking of the fantasy for 20 years.
The jury knows what Lake planned. This edited diary is inadmissible.
Kelly's attempt to put Leonard Lake on trial appeared to be blocked, but he countered the prosecution's strategy with his next witness. In his opening statement, Kelly asserted Claralyn Balazs knew of the Miranda Project and helped Lake recruit women to photograph. Kelly believes she played a far more active role than she admitted and asserted it was Balazs, not Ng, who was Lake's accomplice. The prosecution had not called her as a witness, so as Balazs took the stand, everyone in the courtroom, including the prosecution, wondered what she'd say. Then Kelly read the immunity agreement.
You remember entering into an agreement? I'll read it to the jury. This is an immunity agreement between the state of California and Claralyn Balazs. The state of California promises witness transactional immunity for all crimes, including but not limited to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aiding and abetting murder, theft and received stolen property related to the victim. No questions.
Kelly chose not to question Balazs. He created the appearance she had something to hide, and since she hadn't spoken on the stand, the prosecution could not cross-examine her. Balazs made her immunity deal with the prosecution, but in the end, she provided them with little information and became more valuable to the defense. Kelly then called another witness who could not be cross-examined. He played a tape made by Leonard Lake, describing his motivations for the Miranda Project.
What I want is an off-the-shelf sex partner. I want to be able to use a woman whenever and however I want. And when I'm tired, or satiated, or bored, or not interested, I simply want to put her away.
With a final glimpse into the mind of Leonard Lake, the defense rested its case. Peter Smith made the final closing argument for the prosecution. He reminded the jury of the evidence they'd seen and asked them to return a guilty verdict. Then the trial took its most surprising turn. After hearing the prosecution sum up their case against him, Ing filed a handwritten motion demanding he could testify on his own behalf. When Kelly tried to convince his client otherwise, Ing threatened to fire him. Against the advice of his lawyers, Charles Ing would be taking the witness stand. Assuming the prosecution would use LaBerge's testimony to corner Ing, Deputy Public Defender Clapp decided to take the offensive and prove that LaBerge had lied.
Did you tell him that, with regard to Brenda O'Connor, Kathy Allen, that you shot them in the head while they were handcuffed and blindfolded?
No.
Ing testified he'd helped to imprison Brenda O'Connor and Kathleen Allen, but hadn't intended to hurt or kill them.
Did you tell Maurice LaBerge that you put their bodies on a pile of wood and ignited it with gasoline?
No.
Did you agree to kill, intend to kill, or kill any of the victims in the 12 murder charges?
No.
Ing's denials continued for hours as Clapp went over every statement Ing allegedly made to his jailmate.
That we gave the
Then Clapp moved on to have Ing explain the M Ladies tape. On the tape, Brenda O'Connor begged Ing not to take her baby away.
Mr. Ing, with regard to the videotape...
To which he replied, "It's better that the baby is dead."
Why did you say that?
I don't know why I said that. It was just in the heat of the moment. Some of the comments and remarks I made, I don't even know I made until I saw the transcripts.
The M Ladies tape had been transcribed during the extradition hearing so that every word spoken on the tape could be understood. When Charlene Hanaka cross-examined Ing, she used the transcripts to turn his own words against him.
Were you present at the extradition hearing when Mr. LaBerge testified that you told him that you could hear on the video the sounds of handcuffs clicking?
I remember that statement he made.
How would Mr. LaBerge know that you could hear the sounds of handcuffs clicking? But that's not on the printed transcript, right, of M Ladies?
Right. None of these quotes attributed to me.
Hanaka demonstrated for the jury that the only way LaBerge could have known about the sound of the handcuffs was if Ing told him. It was clear, despite Ing's denials on the stand, that he had told Maurice LaBerge of the details of the torture and the killings, details LaBerge couldn't have known any other way. Hanaka then set out to establish that Charles Ing was not a bystander, but a willing participant in the crimes. She replayed a scene from the M Ladies tape, showing Ing cutting Brenda O'Connor's shirt off.
So you never talked to Leonard ahead of time about your plan to cut her clothes off, right?
No, not on the tape.
So you just decided on your own to cut her clothes off, right?
Yes.
Without any specific instruction from Leonard Lake?
Hanaka again turned to the videotapes. She played a portion of the tape where Ing tells Leonard Lake that a gun is on the table.
You told Leonard at one point that the piece was on the table, right?
Yeah, I remember saying something like that.
What did you mean by the piece?
Oh, just wanted to let him know the gun was on the table in case Kathy might grab the gun and shoot him with it.
Well, now, she's handcuffed, right?
Yes.
And she's got leg manacles on?
Yes, I believe so.
And there are 2 of you and 1 of her, right?
Yes.
And the reason you told Leonard that the gun was on the table is because you were afraid Kathy might pick it up and shoot him?
Something like that.
Anaka had shown that Ng was more than a bystander to Leonard Lake's crimes.
Thank you.
He was an active participant who sometimes even directed Leonard Lake. During his trial, Charles Ng took the stand after the prosecution closed. Because of this, the judge gave them the opportunity to restate their closing arguments after Ng's testimony.
It's never Ng's fault. He always lays the blame on someone else. He was not under the control of Leonard Lake. He was his own person. He was making his own independent choices and doing the things he wanted to do.
William Kelly then gave the closing arguments for the defense. He asserted the prosecution had simply failed to prove their case and attacked their most important piece of evidence, the M. Ladies tape.
Now let me say something about that tape. No matter how many times you see that tape, and no matter how many times you react to it emotionally, and no matter how many different ways they show it to you and excerpts from it, there's one thing you never see. Anybody being murdered. And you don't see Charles Ng involved in anybody's murder. No matter how many times you see him cut the clothes off Brenda O'Connor, and as offensive as that is, and I grant you it's offensive, but it ain't murder. It just isn't.
Charles Ng had been charged with the murders of 7 men, 3 women, and 2 babies. His fate was now in the hands of the jury.
Anybody who prosecutes cases or tries cases knows there's never a sure thing with the jury. And that's the difficult aspect of being a prosecutor. You have to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt. And all 12 have to agree. It has to be unanimous.
The jury deliberated for a week, then 2 weeks. The media coverage intensified as the deliberations stretched into their 3rd week. The prosecutors became increasingly concerned that the jury was having difficulty making a decision. This was not a good sign for the prosecution, who knew their case was mostly circumstantial. If the jury demanded strong physical evidence linking Ng to the crimes in order to deliver a guilty verdict, then Charles Ng might go free. As time dragged on, all the prosecution could do was wait. On February the 24th, 1999, after 3 weeks of waiting, the jury informed the judge they had reached a decision. The prosecutors had called approximately 75 witnesses and presented about 200 pieces of evidence to prove the charges against Charles Ng. All that evidence was now in the hands of the jury.
Has the jury reached its verdict?
We are deadlocked. We are deadlocked on 1 count.
Would the defendant rise and face the jury, please? Read your verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant Charles Ng guilty of the murder of Sean Dobbs as charged in count 1.
The jury found Charles Ng guilty of 11 counts of first-degree murder. They could not come to a conclusion on the death of Paul Costner for lack of evidence. Charles Ng was sentenced to death. For the prosecution, the long ordeal was finally over.
And I was just happy for the people of Calaveras County that finally Mr. Ng was found guilty of these murders after so many years. I'm proud of the fact that I was the district attorney at the time and prosecuted Charles Ng, and I was in essence the last person standing from Calaveras County after all these years.
With a final cost of over $20 million, the longest and most expensive criminal case in California history came to a close. For 13 years, the prosecution never wavered in their pursuit of justice. Charles Ng now sits on California's death row.
The halting of the Russian offensive in March had brought a lull to the southern sector of the Russian front, an area that had seen horrific and savage fighting for more than 6 blood-soaked months.